So in this installment of the new video series, Let's Read the Qur'an, I'm just going to give some initial observations about the book itself. If you have, if you've lived with this book your whole life, if this book is like at the center of your worldview, and you're so very familiar with this book, it might be surprising and interesting to you to see how someone who, just picks up this book for the first time, what are some of the things that strike them about this book when you first see it, if you're not that really familiar with it. And as an illustration of how atheists would like look at a sacred book just from scratch. So here's how I would go about it. A lot of people say a lot of things about this book, um, but before looking at what everybody says about this book, I'd like to look at the book itself. um, Before looking at that, there's a lot of objective facts about this book. By objective, what I mean here, I put it in scare quotes. I mean there are facts that people just don't argue about this book. There's facts that people do argue about this book, and there's facts that people just don't argue about this book. And so what I would like to do is I'd like to use the objective facts to calibrate the disputed facts about it. So if we can use the facts about this book to calibrate the traditions, to like really see how reliable are these traditions about this book, do the traditions jibe with the facts about the book? Okay, so what is an example of a non-disputed fact about this book? Well, for example, it's short. As far as sacred text goes, it's pretty short. I mean, it's even shorter than the New Testament, and it's way shorter than the Bible as a whole. That's a good example of a non-disputed fact. Nobody argues whether or not the Quran is longer than or shorter than the New Testament, right? It's just a non-disputable fact about it. Another non-disputable fact about it, the text is remarkably stable. There is 100% agreement as to what exactly the Quran is. Now, this might not seem so impressive, but we live in an age of uh, computer-generated stuff. We live in an age of printing presses. Um, this is actually remarkably, it's a standout fact about the book. If you compare it with the New Testament, for example, I mean, you can get a job. You can spend your whole career doing nothing but comparing manuscripts of the New Testament to see where they agree with each other and where they disagree with each other. There's just that much textual disagreement among the copies of the New Testament that we have to us. You could have no such job like that as an Islamic scholar. There is just one text which everybody agrees is the text of the Quran. It's a very remarkable fact. Another interesting fact that would strike you, if you pick up this book and look at it, it seems different from any other book on your shelf. If you pick up any other book on your shelf and look at the chapters, there's not really any correlation between how long the chapters are and the order that the chapters are placed in that book. But the Quran is not that way. By and large, there's some exceptions, but by and large, the longer surahs come first. Surah is kind of like a chapter in the Quran, I guess. Um, and they get shorter and shorter as you go through the text. Now, it seems like it's really weird, and today people really don't write books this way. But um, it's actually quite common way to write books before there were printing presses. Now, why is this? Well, say you wanted to generate a boatload of copies of a text, right? What you would do is you'd set up some sort of assembly line. You would make the books, you would bind them, and you have a whole bunch of blank books there. And then you want people to write longhand into these pre-made blank books. And but the since it's a book that you're writing into, there's a real danger that you'll run out of space if you write too long, or if you write too big, or don't put enough lines on the page. You might run out of space before you run out of book to copy before you run out of blank book, and then what are you going to do? Um, so what people would typically do is they would just order the stuff so the longer chapters come first, and that way it's a lot easier to tell as you're copying it longhand into a blank book to make sure that you're not going to run out of space, because it's easier to squeeze the shorter chapters in if you have to like start adding lines to a page or writing smaller, this kind of stuff. Now scrolls don't have this problem. If you're copying one scroll to another and you run out of space, you just stitch another piece of vellum on, or you glue another slab of papyrus on. So books that were originally written on scrolls, their chapters typically are not ordered this way. But it's very common actually at that time for books to be written this way. So it's kind of amazing what we can infer just from the form of the book, right? We can infer that it is a book. In fact, it calls itself a book several times in there, but it is a book. It never was transmitted on scrolls. Um, it was not created after the invention of the printing press. It's a relatively ancient book in that regard. So just from the form of the book, we can conclude that it was a book that was written sometime between 8300 and 1439, when the printing press was invented. And from the textual stability of it, we can conclude that it was written once at a specific time and place, and at that time, every version that we have of the Quran now is a descendant from that one original prototype of it. Just from the non-disputable facts about the book, we can conclude all of this. So how does this stack up against the traditions regarding this book? And actually, they stack up remarkably well. I was quite impressed, actually, when I read about what Islamic historians say about the origins of the Quran. Tradition holds that the Quran was orally transmitted until 632, and then it was written down in several different copies. But by 650 AD, it was obvious. I mean, Islam was becoming an empire, and there was multiple languages. Not everybody spoke Arabic, etc., etc. It was just obvious that a definitive edition was needed. So the third caliph produced one. And traditions record that they were very careful, in producing this definitive edition, and that they tried to make it as much as possible faithful with the oral versions which the people had memorized who had lived with the Prophet. And this is very impressive, the tradition does record that there were variant copies of this that were different, and the tradition does record that these were all collected and destroyed. So, the historians talking about this book obviously cared a lot about this book, and a lot of things. So basically what I'm trying to say is we should take seriously what the Islamic historians have to say about the origins of this book. By calibrating the non-disputable facts with the disputable facts, they actually check out pretty good. Now, how does this stack up with my preconceptions, though? As an atheist coming and picking up this book, how does it stack up with those? Well, unfortunately, it seems like it's just too pat in a certain way, right? It seems to me the Quran is just so in context with the 7th century technology society. I mean, it's exactly the kind of book that you would expect to be produced. Say you were a caliph and you wanted to mass produce a whole bunch of copies of a single book and distribute them out. How would you produce it? This is exactly what you do. You would put the longest surahs first. You would, to make it easy to copy and easy to copy accurately. It just seems like it's so in context with the technology and the society that they had in the 7th century. It's exactly what you expect. But of course, if it were an ahistorical revelation from God, I would expect the unexpected, right? Kind of an oxymoron, but I wouldn't expect it to be something that I would expect, right? I expect it to be completely different. So for example, if it was the first book to come along that had a table of contexts and an index, something which would be very, very hard to do given 7th century technology, then it would look more like something which came from some sort of ahistorical perspective, or if it was a YouTube video instead of a book or something like that, right? I mean, it just seems like it I don't know, as a historical revelation from God, it just doesn't seem to fit so far. So as is the custom, we end this with some questions. So the questions are, is the order of the surah important? Okay, so would it be a different Quran if the surahs were ordered differently? What order should we read the surahs in? And is the division of these surahs into Meccan and Medina good division? Are there better ways to cluster the surahs? By which I mean, would we get more insight out of the surahs if we read them in a different order than the order that we find them? Anyway, thanks a lot.